Hello, welcome back. I'm glad you made it back. Uh, Hopefully, you've not struggled too much with some of this content. I know some of it is a little dry, some of it is a little confusing, but all God's word is good and it's all meant to teach and to grow us. So it's important. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to learn what is it that we have learned and we need to unlearn, and what is it that we thought we learned, but we were completely wrong about, and what is it that we don't even know anything about. And that's why we're studying uh, the Bible book by book, basically. We're in Exodus 23. We've done all of Genesis, and we're more than halfway through Exodus now. Uh, I am seriously considering doing the book of Acts because I want to jump into the New Testament and just show some of the connections. I will probably do that next, and then we will do Leviticus and Numbers. And I know those books sound a little boring, but I promise Leviticus is the best book in the Bible. I'll fight you over that one. Well, probably not literally fight you, but once you read it and study it with us, I think you will probably feel the same way. And I don't say we and us a lot because I have multiple personalities. I say it mostly because it just sounds right to me, because I feel like we're all together in this. I'm not really just teaching you, we're learning together. And I'm sharing hopefully what God's shown me that will help you discover what God wants you to see. So that's where we're at. Exodus chapter 23. Let's jump right in the complete Jewish Bible. And if you love gossip, this book's for you, or this chapter anyway. It starts off, you are not to repeat false rumors. Do not join hands with the wicked by offering perjured testimony. Do not follow the crowd when it does what is wrong, and don't allow the popular view to sway you into offering testimony for any cause if the effect will be to pervert justice. On the other hand, don't favor a person's lawsuit simply because he is poor. If you come upon your enemy's ox or donkey straying, you must return it to him. If you see the donkey which belongs to someone who hates you lying down helpless under its load, you are not to pass him by, but to go and help him free it. Do not deny anyone justice in his lawsuit simply because he is poor. Keep away from fraud, and do not cause the death of the innocent and righteous, for I will not justify the wicked. You are not to receive a bribe, for a bribe blinds the clear-sighted and subverts the cause of the righteous. You are not to oppress a foreigner, for you know how a foreigner feels, since you were foreigners in the land of Egypt. For 6 years you are to sow your land with seed and gather in its harvest. But the seventh year you are to let it rest and lie fallow, so that the poor among you, your people, can eat, and what they leave the wild animals on the countryside can eat. Do the same with your vineyard and olive grove. For 6 days you are to work, but on the seventh day you are to rest, so that your ox and donkey can rest, and your slave girl's son and the foreigner be renewed. Pay attention to everything I have said to you. Do not invoke the names of other gods, or even let them be heard crossing your lips. 3 times a year you are to observe a festival for me. Keep the festival of matzah. For 7 days, as I ordered you, you are to eat matzah. At the end, determined in the month of Aviv, for it was in that month that you left Egypt. No one is to appear before me empty-handed. Next, the festival of harvest, the first fruits of your efforts sowing in the field, and last, the festival of ingathering at the end of the year, when you gather in from your fields the results of your effort. 3 times a year, all your men are to appear before the Lord Adonai. You are not to offer the blood of my sacrifice with leavened bread, nor is the fat of my festival to remain all night until morning. You are to bring the best first fruits of your land into the house of Adonai your God. You are not to boil a young animal in its mother's milk. I am sending an angel ahead of you to guard you on the way and bring you to a place I have prepared. Pay attention to him. Listen to what he says and do not rebel against him, because he will not forgive any wrongdoing of yours, since my name resides in him. But if you listen to what he says and do everything I tell you, then I will be an but if you listen to what he says and do everything I tell you, then I will be an enemy to your enemies and a foe to your foes. When my angel goes ahead of you and brings you to the Amorite, Hittite, Sizarite, Canaanite, Hivite, and Usite, I will make an end for them. You are not to worship their gods, serve them, or follow their practices. Rather, you are to demolish them completely and smash their standing stones to pieces. You are to serve Adonai your God, and he will bless your food and water. I will take sickness away from among you. In your land, your women will not miscarry or be barren, and you will live out the full span of your lives. I will send terror of me ahead of you, throwing into confusion all the people to whom you come, and I will make all your enemies turn their backs on you. I will send hornets ahead of you to drive out the Hivites, the Canaanites, and the Hittites from before you. I will drive them out from before you in 1 year, which would cause the land to become desolate and the wild animals too many for you. I'm sorry, I will not drive them out. He was not going to do it quickly because then the land would return. And remember, they're not there yet. He's telling them all what's going to happen. So I will drive them out from before you gradually until you have grown in number and can take possession of the land. I will set your boundaries from the Sea of Sup to the Sea of the Fishtim, and from the desert to the Euphrates River. For I will hand the inhabitants of the land over to you, and you will drive them out from before you. You are not to make a covenant with them or with their gods. You are not to live in your land. Otherwise, they are not to live in your land. Otherwise, they will make you sin against me by ensnaring you to serve other gods. Don't let them just stand around and tell you how much better it'd be for you to listen to them and be in the world. Get rid of them so you don't even have to deal with it. So these verses really refer to judicial integrity, not as much for gossip, but the behavior of witnesses, judges, and parties. If you're involved in any way, you're supposed to tell the truth, basically. Don't allow what is popular to become what is right. That's an American tradition. If it's popular, we call it right, and we move on, even if God said it wasn't right. God is speaking against political correctness, favoritism, tolerance and appeasement and denial of evil, and the end justifies the means mentality of, we know this is against God's law, but it serves a purpose. I want to do this. That's why we're doing it. This list of laws ensured division. So if you're like, this is not very inclusive or tolerant, God is not tolerant and inclusive. He is about separation. He is about electing, dividing, and separating. That's how he does it. He creates his unity by division. He sets up dividing lines. You have to choose. You're going to be on one side or the other. You can't be in the middle. Man is given free will to stand on one side or the other. If he stands on God's principles, he has unity with God, but conflict with man. Trust me. The reason that Israel has always been a target and pretty much always will is because they've dedicated themselves to obeying Jehovah regardless of the consequences. Most of us, it's like, well, I didn't say anything because they get mad at me or she'll yell at me or something. Most of us know, well, some of us know, Israelites all know that people are trying to kill them because of their stance on God. It's not really any more complicated than that. Are we willing to do that? The goal of the church is to make the church as close and as attractive as the world while still maintaining this little hint of religiousness. And God's not about that. He never said, I want you to look just like the world, but still be righteous. That's not a thing. The majority rules have really replaced God rules. I know this. I've been in a church my whole life, but recently in church, I've tried to change some things, and that was not okay. They preferred the world's rules or majority rules over God's rules. So tolerance has replaced our obligation to discern between good and evil. I can't even say what's good or bad. It's like, well, God said it. That's what I'm going with. Christ said, take up your cross and follow me. If you're not rejected by the world, you're not doing what I told you to do. I mean, that's what Jesus basically said. If the world doesn't hate you like they hated me, you're probably doing something wrong. Every saying of Christ came either directly or in principle from the Old Testament. That's where he got it all. So in verses 10 through 12, we see the principle of the Sabbath. Oh, that came back again. I thought we didn't have to worry about that. Why does God mention it so many times if he doesn't care about it? We see the Sabbath principle applied to years. It benefits, the benefits are applied to plants and the soil, then to animals, then to people. He says, leave the land barren, let it rest. So if he gave the Sabbath to land and animals, why wouldn't he want you to follow it? The first is about a physical benefit, and the second is about the spiritual benefit of the Sabbath, the Shabbat, as a day of physical rest and as an observance of a God-commanded holy day. So not only are you supposed to rest, but you also should do it because he said do it. That's a pretty good reason too. So as a Christian, you will be blessed from a physical standpoint, no matter what day you choose to rest. But there is only one day that brings the spiritual benefit, and that is the day the Lord set apart, the seventh day called Shabbat. So you can pick any day you want to rest and you'll benefit from that, but you won't get the spiritual benefit for any day other than the seventh, Shabbat. So verse 13 through 20, Jehovah is dealing with how man is to relate to him. The Hebrews are just like us. They're looking for loopholes. I've said that a few times. Is it an image of God if I have a statue or a painting of Christ? Do I tithe on my net or my gross? We get these questions all the time. I'm trying to find the line that I can kind of follow the law, but not really. Worshiping God is the same thing as watching someone else sing, or worshiping God is not the same thing as watching somebody else sing a worship song. That's great. I love CCY, and she could sing anything and I would love it. But that's not me worshiping. That's just her singing and me listening, unless I'm in a worship mode at that time. But God makes it clear that the Israelites were have nothing to do with other gods, period, nothing. So in verse 14, the Hebrew religious calendar is set up. The first pilgrimage feast for the matzah occurs in the spring to celebrate God's deliverance from slavery. The second pilgrimage feast, meaning you got to go to the temple, Feast of Weeks or Shavuot, occurs 50 days following the Feast of Matzah to celebrate the second harvest of the year. Christians call this Pentecost. Now the third is the Feast of the Ingathering, Sukkot, or the Feast of Tabernacles. Sukkot is a fall festival or feast, and it represents the last of the harvest. And remember, they're still in the desert, so they're not harvesting anything. God's setting the pattern. He's starting to tell them about it. It's kind of like when you were in school and your algebra teacher said something. It's like, when am I ever going to use this? Well, you didn't know years later you were going to use it. Hopefully use algebra. I don't know. So we have men's appointed times and we have God's appointed times. Some see Paul declaring the end of the biblical feast when he cautioned against observance of men's appointed times and telling his listeners that the rituals and procedures the rabbis had devised was not from God. But those were man-made things. This is what God said to do. Jesus participated in all the biblical feasts, and most of the major events occurred on one of the holy days during these feasts. Yeshua died during Passover. He was raised on first fruits, and God sent the Holy Spirit on Shavuot. You may not have ever even heard that before, but that's why they matter. That's why they're still important. The last half of verse 16 is kind of strange. You're not to boil a child in his mother's milk. As a tradition, Jews took this to mean not to serve meat and dairy products at the same time. That's a kosher food rule. It's a rabbi rule. It's not a God rule. But at the same time, this was something that pagans did. That's why God forbade it, because he said that was basically just doing pagan worship. They would boil an animal in its own mother's milk as a way to satisfy this God thing. So he said, don't do that. Now, verse 20, the tone kind of changes. He's going to send an angel to prepare the way. They are to destroy the idols and smash the stone altars and monuments. He's like, don't leave it around. Don't have a Buddha somewhere. Don't have another kind of idol thing or a Ouija board or Allah or any of that stuff around. He's like, get rid of all of it. I don't want it anywhere. And if they will serve him, he will make them fruitful. He'll keep them well and make them multiply. That's what he says. If you'll do that, I'll make you well. I'll make you fruitful. Verse 29 says God is going to have Israel take over at a rate that they can handle. Like if somebody gave me 10,000 acres, I wouldn't be able to handle that. It would take me years to figure out how to deal with all of that. So he's giving it to them slowly, driving people out slowly so the land doesn't just take them over. Verse 31, we're given the boundaries of the land. This is a very large piece of land, and Israel has never fully possessed all of this land, even now. No peace treaties, no buying land, no appeasements of any kind. This was God speaking. If Israel allows these tribes to stay, they will make you sin against me, is what he says, by ensnaring us to serve other gods. If we hang out in it, we're going to fall victim to it. God's like, no, don't do that. Get them away from us. So when Joshua was leading Israel, they made treaties. They allowed intermarriage, practiced tolerance, and Israel suffers from this disobedience to this very day. One of the reasons they haven't occupied all the land and they don't have peace and fruitfulness in the land is because they've not honored what God said to do. The reality is that had Israel followed God's instructions when invading Canaan, there wouldn't be a Middle East crisis today, had they done what God told them to do. So that's chapter 23. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it. Read ahead, chapter 24, and some of these will make a lot more sense to you as we study. So God bless. Share this with a friend, and don't forget, love God, love people, and change the world.